Milton Friedman saw right through the equality trap. Let's analyze this.
In fact, there used to be a saying, 3 generations from shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves. We shouldn't argue on the basis of false factual premises.
When a young college student asked Milton about equal outcomes, not only did he expose the entire premise, but he also explained in simple terms how it plays out in real time.
And what ultimately happens when you aim at equality is that A and B decide what C shall do for D, except that they take a little bit of a commission off on the way.
And today, we're telling you all about it. Here we go.
You say that you believe many people in America believe in your definition of freedom from coercion. And I might agree with you, but I also believe that many people in America believe in a different kind of freedom, and that is freedom to well-being, a certain level of standards, fair housing, at a good price, education, etc. The other thing I want to say is that the system has built into it the poor remain poor and the rich remain rich, and that is an externality of the system.
It is not built into the system at all. It has never been true. It's simply a false. If you look at the evidence, there is an enormous amount of mobility from one class to the other. In fact, there used to be a saying, 3 generations from shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves, which reflected exactly the opposite effect. So it simply is not built into the system. On the contrary, there's a great deal of mobility within generations and between generations, and we shouldn't argue on the basis of false factual premises.
Now, this is a point we hear all the time, and it's gained even more traction in recent years as progressive ideas have become more popular. The problem is that it takes a real issue, which is the fact that we're witnessing a growing wealth gap, and then jumps to conclusions that don't necessarily follow. You see, the other side of the argument is that last year alone, quote, the U.S. minted 736,000 new millionaires, bringing the total number of Americans with such wealth to a record 8.7 million. To further put it into perspective, that's about 40% of millionaires on the entire planet. Now, whether you love capitalism or hate it, those numbers suggest there are still enormous opportunities for people willing to pursue them. But the student wasn't convinced by that approach and doubled down on his premise.
Well, let me continue because I'm not sure it really has an effect on the question. Because it is not immediately easy to become in the wealthy class. There are certain parts of the system which make that virtually impossible for the real person. Now, I believe that this freedom too represents the belief in equality as opposed to liberty. And I wonder, is it possible to build a system based on this equality, which I believe that many people agree in, and would not be willing to sacrifice to the liberty of freedom from?
Well, I'm not going to be able to give a full answer to your question because you've asked a very, very complex question, and so you're going to have to pardon me if I am a little dogmatic. In my opinion, a society that aims for equality before liberty will end up with neither equality nor liberty.
Now, first of all, credit to the student for keeping things civil and asking a genuinely thoughtful question. That's becoming increasingly rare on our college campuses these days. And to be fair, he wasn't asking something simple. He packed a lot into it, from taxation and whether people in higher income brackets should be required to contribute more, to the broader question of whether true equality can ever be achieved through public policy. Those are the kinds of issues economists, politicians, and academics have been arguing over for decades. Most people would struggle to give a clear answer on the spot. Not Friedman, though, as he laid out why a system built around enforcing equality eventually runs into problems that are almost impossible to overcome.
And a society that aims first for liberty will not end up with equality, but it will end up with a closer approach to equality than any other kind of system that has ever been developed. Now, that conclusion is based both on evidence from history, across history, and also, I believe, on reasoning which, if you try to follow through the implications of aiming first at equality, will become clear to you. You can only aim at equality by giving some people the right to take things from others. And what ultimately happens when you aim at equality is that A and B decide what C shall do for D. except that they take a little bit of a commission off on the way.
Now, the counter-argument from progressives is to point to the Nordic countries. After all, they consistently rank in the top 5 of the WEF's global social mobility list. But that misses the heart of the argument. Sure, those countries produce strong numbers on paper, but they do it by narrowing the range of outcomes. So the question becomes, what exactly are the people moving into? A more comfortable, secure middle? Yes. But that's not necessarily the same as having the level of upward mobility, entrepreneurial spirit, wealth creation, and individual freedom that exists in America. Here's another statistic to prove this point. Dave Ramsey's firm surveyed 10,000 millionaires in the country to understand exactly how they built their wealth. And they found that, quote, 89% of them were first generation, meaning they did not inherit their money. In an earlier part of the speech, Milton talked extensively about the difference between capitalist and socialist systems, detailing a core difference between the two.
You have to ask the proponents of these two systems. Has socialism failed because its good qualities were perverted by evil men who got in charge? Was it simply because Stalin took over from Lenin that communism went the way it did? Has capitalism succeeded despite the immoral values that pervade it? I think the answer to both questions is in the negative. What we're concerned with in discussing moral values here are those that have to do with the relations between people. It's important to distinguish between two sets of moral considerations. The morality that is relevant to each of us in our private life, how we each individually conduct ourselves, behave. And then what's relevant to systems of government and organization are the relations between people. As I see it, the fundamental value in relations among people is to respect the dignity and the individuality of fellow men. To treat your fellow man not as an object to be manipulated for your purpose, but to treat him as a person with his own values and his own rights, a person to be persuaded, not coerced, not forced, not bulldozed, not brainwashed.
See, that's the key takeaway here. And we see it time and time again from those on the left. Their entire messaging starts by convincing people that the deck is completely stacked against them, that hard work and personal responsibility aren't enough to improve their circumstances. They eventually conclude that the reason for all the misery in society is because of the, quote, evil 1%, who didn't earn their wealth through legitimate means either. What's ironic is that many of the politicians pushing such narratives talk their way into becoming millionaires. And Bernie Sanders is the living proof of it. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on this story. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And remember, keep thinking.